So let us begin with understanding each of them. So future methods. Future method is the most simplest form of asynchronous Apex. Now what it is simply a method similar to other methods that we have in Apex. The only difference between a future method and a normal method is that future method can be executed in future. As the name suggests, future method, it is a method which will get executed in future. Now what does future mean? Future means it will get executed when the system resources are available, right? So synchronous Apex, what will happen if the system resources are not available and you have just defined a method? The method tries to get executed, and if it finds the system resources are not available, if it is not able to get executed, it would fail, right? But with the future method, what happens? It waits in the queue, and when the system resources become available, then it gets executed, which is the good thing about a future method. So if you are thinking of executing a long running operation, you may use a future method. So the advantage that you will have is, one, it will not interrupt or interfere in the execution of the synchronous Apex. So whatever is your most important logic which needs to get executed first, it will wait for the future method will wait for its turn. It will wait for the system resources to become available. It is not going to interfere with the other synchronous logics. It will allow synchronous logic to get executed first, and once the synchronous Apex has got executed, then this will go and get executed. So it waits in the job queue and it gets executed only when the system resources become available. So that future, when we say future, does not mean like after 10 days or after 1 year or something like that. It only means the future can be after 2 minutes, it can be after 1 minute, at times, and it can be instantly also at times. If nothing else is getting executed, this method can get executed instantly also. But if there is something else that is getting executed, system resources are not available, then it will wait for the system resources to become available and then it will get executed. So that is about the future method. Now, a few key things about future method. So first of all, it is used for executing long running operations. That's something which we understand. Secondly, if we talk about this as an example, you can think of a call out to an external web service. So if you're making a call out to an external web service and which is going to be a long running stuff, then you can possibly use future method. These operations run on its own thread on its own time. So as I said, it will wait in the job queue. It will run on its own thread on its own time when the system resources become available. So there is no hurry for this method to get executed immediately. These are queued and execute when system resources are available. So this is what we have discussed. Waits for system resources to become available, and when the system resources are available, then it gets executed. Advantage of it. So why would we do this? So the biggest advantage of this is, there are two things. So one, of course, this way you are not putting additional, pressure, or you are not putting additional performance related stuff into your Apex, engine. So your code, the most important code gets executed. Those are not interrupted. So you are clearly bifurcating between this code is more important for me. This code is slightly lesser important, can be executed after some point of time, right? So now, advantage of a future method is that or asynchronous Apex in general, usually asynchronous Apex get comparatively higher governor limits. So in Apex, everything is controlled by governor limits. For everything, there is a governor limit which is defined by Salesforce. Comparatively, the governor limits for asynchronous Apex are higher for some of the governor limits, not for all, but for some of the governor limits, like SOQL queries limits, your heap size, etc., will get slightly higher governor limits. I'll talk about this a little bit more in details, but later on. Now let's go a little further and talk about the syntax of future method. Syntax of future method is very, very simple. So there is no specific syntax as such, but there are a few things which you need to understand. So from a syntax perspective, all that you have to do is, if you just need to define a method as a future method, you simply need to use @future annotation here. Okay. So for future methods, all that we have to do, we just have to use an @future annotation before defining the method. So if this is your method, right? What you'll do before the method, you will just go and put @future annotation. So what will this @future annotation do? This @future annotation is going to indicate that this is a future method and the code will get executed. Then, the property of this method will slightly change now. It will wait in the job queue. It will not get executed immediately, and it will wait in the job queue for the system resources to become available. When the system resources are available, then this method will go and get executed. All right. So now, as I said, the syntax part of this is pretty simple, straightforward. However, there are a few things that we need to keep in mind while we are defining a future method. First thing, your future method is always a static method. It has to be a static method. It cannot be otherwise, right? So it is always required to be a static method, and it can only return a void type. So it cannot return a value. This method always has to return a void type. Now, primarily the reason for that is if the method is basically returning something, some other value, and that value is being used by some other method, then your entire flow will not work. So all asynchronous Apex need to be void type. So for any method where there is another piece of code or another user who is waiting for a return value, those cannot be defined as your asynchronous Apex, right? So for example, if I write a method and this method has to retrieve some data and it has to show the data to me on the user interface. Now this cannot be an asynchronous Apex, right? Because there is a user waiting for the return value, right? So these methods ideally, they get executed, but they would not return anything. So that type of method only should be asynchronous Apex. So for your future method also, it always has to be, it always has to have a return type void. So that is another part. The specified parameters, in case in the method, if you're defining parameters, you cannot have those parameters, or those parameters can only be primitives. Those can be primitives, arrays of primitives, or list of primitives, collections of primitives. These are permitted. Okay. Now, what is not permitted? S objects are not permitted as parameters, or objects are not permitted as parameters. You cannot specify an S object or a collection of S object as a parameter for future method. Now, the reason for that is very, very simple. The reason for that is because your S object is basically a live record. So if I try to specify an account A1 as a parameter, now the issue with this is that this A1 is a live record, right? If A1 is a live record, it can change from time to time. So let's say my future method got called at 9:10 a.m. and it actually got executed at 9:40 a.m. There is a possibility that the value in the A1 can change between these two times, right? Between 9:10 when it was actually called versus 9:40 when it got actually executed, right? Now, what will happen here? Your record will still work with the old value and it will override the new value. So at 9:40 when it gets executed, it will override the new value. At this point of time, the values have changed. There's a new record, but it is still working with the old value, and this overrides the new value. So that becomes an issue. That causes inconsistency in your database, and that is the reason why you cannot have S object as parameters. Now you may be thinking, okay, fine, if this is the problem, what is the solution to this? We'll come to the solution of it, but with future method, you do not have a solution to this. All right. There is a workaround, which again I will discuss a little later, but this is what is permitted within your future method. So you always have to work with primitives as data types, all right, and collections of primitives. Even if you have to work with a record, you can use ID. There is a data type ID which is also of primitive type. You can use ID of the record because IDs will not change, and then you can query the ID inside the method and then you can execute it. But as parameters, you cannot use S object data type as parameter for your future methods. Okay, and that's what we just discussed, that it cannot take S object or objects as arguments for these two reasons, because the values might change between the time method was called and the time when it was executed, and if that happens, it is going to override the new value with the old value which it has taken when the method was called. Okay, so now another aspect of the future method. So future method can also be, so we spoke about where the future method can be used. So let's talk about a few more scenarios where future methods can become very useful or helpful. So future method, one of the I would say practical use cases of future method is also to work with mixed DML operations. Now, what is mixed DML operation? Mixed DML operation is primarily when you are trying to do two DML operations in the same transaction with two types of objects. I'm going to come to that. So future method would let you isolate your DML operations. Future methods will let you isolate your DML operations, right? So isolating DML operation means, if, as I said, if we are trying to perform, if this is my code and if I'm trying to perform, let's say DML1 and DML2, okay, then let's say if I want to create a user and then I want to create a custom record in a custom object. Let's say DML1 is create a user, DML2 is create a custom record, and if I'm trying to do these two things in the same Apex code, same method, then what happens usually, Salesforce throws a mixed DML error. All right, so the mixed DML error basically occurs when we try to perform DML operation simultaneously on two objects, two types of objects. So one object can be a standard or custom object. So when you're trying to perform a DML on a standard or a custom object along with a system object, so these are two different types of objects that we have. We have the standard or the custom object, right? And then we have some certain system objects. System objects are the objects like your users, user role, group, profile, etc. So these are system objects. So if you're trying to perform a DML on both the types of object at the same time, then Apex throws a mixed DML error, right? So what would happen? So in this example, I'm trying to do two DML. So my first DML is on the user object, which is a system object. And the second one is a custom record on a custom object, right? Now what will happen? In this case, it would throw a mixed DML error. Future method can be used to isolate these two things. So, then what would happen? Then you would not encounter this particular issue, right? So this is a very, very practical use case of future method.